Welcome once again, my fellow manipulators of digital fate. I'm Richie, this is Capricorn. Today's deck is absolutely bonkers. So I saw a lot of people running this on the ladder more and more as the day went on, but I think our version is probably the best version, and I think a lot of people are kind of a little bit behind on catching up to where we're at with the deck. But this deck is called Insidious. And the idea here is we're using Insidious Roots to just go insanely wide with plants, way quicker than you would ever expect it. And we have a really interesting brew with some cool cards in here that I don't think a lot of people have thought of yet. And as more and more people start to experiment with this deck, I really want to make sure we get our version out. Because this was one of the first decks that I came up with that I was going to use in early access before they canceled early access. And I definitely just want to make my mark and like show you guys some of these cards that are nuts with it before everyone else starts to realize just how crazy they are. So I'm going to break it down in the deck tech. But before we get to that, make sure you like, make sure you subscribe, do the damn thing, help out the channel, because all of that interaction, every single little bit does help a ton. And also catch me live every Monday through Friday over on Twitch. That's twitch.tv/quarantinecapricorn, because if I'm alive and I'm breathing, I'm there and I'm streaming. Also, the budget version of this deck. If you want to know what you should put in if you take out a few of the rares, let me know in a comment down below, because it's very easy to replace some of the rares in this deck and still have it completely pop off as a budget deck. There's only a few in here to begin with, and they're not super consequential to the deck. They just make it that much better. So let me know if you want to know what you should replace for certain rares. Let me know in the comments below, and let's check out the deck. Alright, so this deck is completely busted. At the core of the deck, we have Insidious Roots here, a new uncommon, 1 green and 1 black for an enchantment. Creature tokens can tap for a mana of any color, and also whenever one or more creature cards leave your graveyard, you get a 0/1 plant token creature that immediately gets a +1/+1 counter, because you also put a +1/+1 counter on every single plant when this triggers, not just the one that you just got, which is kind of crazy. So this is basically a 1/2 plant that can tap for mana of any color right out of the gates. Your very first plant that you get with this is going to be still kind of significant, right? But then all of your plants scale up the more cards you start to exile from your graveyard, and the more you go wide with these plants. And all of them can tap for a mana of any color since they're token creatures. This card can go completely off the rails very quickly, and the fact that it's just an uncommon is kinda gnarly. That makes this one of the better budget brews you can make right now, because all of the rares that I'm going to show you in this deck are supplemental. They're all stuff that you don't need for the core of the deck to just go off and go crazy. They just make the deck even better. So what we're trying to do is go wide with a ton of stuff, a ton of ways to exile cards from our graveyard, specifically creatures whenever possible, for as little mana as possible, as many different times as possible in a single turn, to just completely go nuts with this. We're using another new card called Gorehound as a 1-drop, 1/1 dog with menace. Whenever another creature with power 2 or less enters the battlefield under your control, you surveil 1. So the idea here is everything in the deck, almost everything in the deck, comes into play as a creature that will initially trigger this. Even the plants we're making with Insidious Roots, like, they're growing to become huge threats, but they initially come in as 0/1 creatures before they get any counters put on them. So they will trigger the Gorehound, being able to constantly, basically every creature that comes into play on your side, for the most part, putting something into your graveyard so that you can keep fueling the graveyard to put things in there that you can exile to trigger the roots, is super important. But the other part of this surveil is equally as important. It just digs so that you can find your Insidious Roots. So in a way, it feels like you have like 8, 10, 12 copies of this card in your deck, because you can surveil so quickly into finding it and slamming it, and then just having a board full of stuff that you can utilize from all the surveiling to actually trigger it and go off, which is kind of gnarly. But we're not stopping at Insidious Roots. One of the rares we're using in this deck is kind of a plan B payoff, an auxiliary payoff, which honestly, it's a good enough card to be The primary payoff for a deck like this, we've used it in the past, and that's Willow Geist. 1 green mana for a 1/1 Trampler. Whenever 1 or more cards leave your graveyard, you put a +1/+1 counter on Willow Geist, and whenever it dies, you gain life equal to its power. So this can become a huge trampler really quick, and then if you're up against aggro, if they do manage to kill it, it's going to buffer your life total, help you survive long enough to just combo out with Insidious Roots, and it's pretty wild. It's worth noting that any card leaving your graveyard is going to trigger the Geist, whereas with Roots, it only triggers when you exile a creature. So if you're in a situation where you don't have your Roots in play, but you do have a Geist, try to prioritize exiling things that are not creatures. Save your creatures for when you have the Roots online. Now, starting at the bottom of the curve, we've got a lot of new cards in this. First of all, we've got Ichor Drinker, 1 mana lifelink, 1/1, can pay 1 black mana to exile it from your graveyard and incubate 2. This is great for a number of reasons. If you're just surveilling with Gorehound and going off, this is a thing that you can hit off the top, put in your graveyard, and immediately gives you something that you can keep the chain going and exile from the graveyard to have another thing exile. But not only that, when you incubate 2, you make that token. When that token becomes a creature, it counts as a token creature, so you can make mana with that token creature, with Insidious Roots, to keep playing even more stuff and keep going off. So Ichor Drinker is absolutely awesome. We've also got a new card that does something similar, Rubblebelt Maverick, 1 green mana for a 1/1. This is going to be a little bit more effective if we manage to play it from our hand than the Ichor Drinker is, because when we play it, we get to surveil too. Helps us fill up our graveyard more. But when it's in our graveyard, whether or not maybe we chump with it and it goes there afterwards, or maybe we're just surveilling it into the graveyard off the top with Gorehound or something like that, when it's in there, we can pay 1 green, exile it from our graveyard to put a +1/+1 counter on any creature. Now that +1/+1 counter is kind of cool, but it's negligible. What we really want is to get exile triggers that are super low mana intensive. This is just 1 green mana, and a lot of times this will just go into the graveyard on its own with triggers from other cards like Gorehound. So it's a way to just keep the chain going, just like with Ichor Drinker. Now, we don't get another token creature out of it to tap for mana like with Ichor Drinker, but we do get a little extra power and toughness in the form of that counter. And it's also, like I said before, better when we actually play it, because it surveils 2 and leans into the synergies of the deck, which is important. The other 1-drop here is Deathbonnet Sprout. This is tried and true. 1/1 can come down on turn 1, mills a card at the beginning of our upkeep, every upkeep, and then as soon as we get to 3 or more creature cards, it flips into a 3/3, so it becomes very aggressive, and then every turn at the beginning of our upkeep, at that point moving forward, we get to exile a creature card from any graveyard and put a +1/+1 counter on this. So this is another one where if we don't have the Roots out yet, maybe we exile our opponent's creatures so that we still get a counter on the Hulk, but we wait and save our own creatures for when the Roots is out. But this is going to trigger all the things we want to trigger, while also growing into a relevant threat in its own right, alongside the Willow Geist and alongside all of these plants. So the common theme here is everything's growing exponentially, while also feeding into all of the synergies at the same time. So it's just kind of insane. The other 1-drop is the only non-permanent card in the entire deck. This is Seed of Hope. 1 green mana for an instant, you mill 2 cards, and then you may put a permanent card from among the milled cards into your hand, and you gain 2 life. So this is just Opt on crack in this deck. This gives us everything Opt does, except it also fills up our graveyard for those synergies. It takes something out of the graveyard and puts it in our hand, which will trigger the Roots and the Willow Geist, and that's just absolutely absurd. But then it just also gives us 2 life, because why not? And that helps us survive against aggro till we get our things going. So even though we're trying to double down on creatures here, because the Roots only triggers off creatures being exiled, so we want as many creatures as possible, and we want to be really strict about if a card makes the cut in this deck that isn't a creature, it better damn well earn its place in the deck, because we really need to keep that creature threshold as high as possible. But Seed of Hope, absolutely worth it. 1 mana just does everything we want to do, and easily makes up for, one that might get milled into the graveyard and be unusable as an exile by just how much value it gives us when we get to actually cast one. So worth the inclusion for sure. Moving on to our 2-drop slot, we have Armored Scrapgorger. This does everything we want as well, and it's another uncommon. 0/3, tap for a mana of any color. When we do, we get to exile something from a graveyard, so we can exile a creature from our own graveyard to trigger the Roots, trigger the Geist, while also getting mana to ramp, to play more things that are going to exile more things, and just go way off the rails. And once again, once we've exiled 3 things with this, we get 3 oil counters. It turns into a 3/3, becomes another relevant threat. So we have all of these small creatures that can become these big threats, like all of a sudden, like flipping a switch. And just there's just so many threats on the board at the same time. We can just really roll over our opponent, which is awesome. We've also got, I want to talk about Tyvar first in the 3-drop slot. Tyvar is probably the most important card in the deck outside of the Roots because he does so much. He is a rare, and the deck does function without him if you want to run a budget version of this deck, which can absolutely compete on the ranked ladder as a budget version. But Tyvar is what's really going to take this deck to the next level. 3 mana for a 3 loyalty planeswalker. You may activate abilities of creatures you control as though they had haste. That's important because all of these plants you're going wide with Insidious Roots, they can all tap for mana, but they all have Summoning Sickness. Well, now, if a Tyvar's out, they can all tap for mana immediately, which means you could just keep going and going and going and going, and it gets absolutely insane. But then both of his loyalty abilities are insanely synergistic with this deck as well. Uptick +1, untap a target creature. We can untap one of those plants or our Scrapgorger, right? So that we can make more mana to keep going if we need to, or we can just swing in with one of our big creatures and then untap it later so that we have it as a blocker. -2, we mill 3 cards, which is what we want to do, and then we return a creature card with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, which is also what we want to do. Not only does it trigger something leaving our graveyard for Insidious Roots and Willow Geist, but that thing goes into the battlefield as well, and we get to use it. And because of the static ability on Tyvar, say we find a Scrapgorger and bring the Scrapgorger into play, we can immediately tap it for mana with Tyvar's ability, immediately exile something else with that, and we can just keep going and going and going. And it's so crazy, it gets way out of hand. And then we've got 4 Skyfisher Spiders as a 4 mana piece of removal. Now, granted, this is a little bit more mana than you'd typically want to spend for removal, but there's a couple key reasons we want the Skyfisher Spider as our removal of choice. First of all, it's a creature. We want to keep our creature count high. If it gets surveilled into the bin, it's fine. It's another thing we can exile and keep the chain going, keep the value coming from the Roots. Also, the 4 mana isn't as bad as it seems because we are going to be drowning in mana once we get the Roots off. And even without the Roots, like, we're making mana with Scrapgorger, and everything else is so cheap in the deck that it's not too tough to make Skyfisher Spider work at 4 mana. It's pretty easy to just be drowning in mana and be able to cast this thing. The other thing that's worth noting about this, not only can it destroy any permanent at all, and we can sack, any of our creatures to do it, even like our Rubblebelt Mavericks or our Ichor Drinkers, which is another way of getting them into the graveyard, which means it's even more synergy. But then on top of that, if the Skyfisher Spider itself dies, it has an ability where it exiles itself from the graveyard to gain you 1 life for each creature in your graveyard, which means it's going to exile itself without spending any mana and trigger your Insidious Roots, your Willow Geist. It's just absolutely absurd. In addition to all of these cards, we have a few one-ofs, which I think are just really, really good in the deck. So first of all, we've got the Mycotyrant. It's legendary, so we're only running 1, but you could absolutely run up to 3 of this and be completely fine. 1 green, 1 black, and 1 for a trampler with power and toughness equal to the number of fungi and or saplings that you control. At the beginning of your end step, you make a number of 1/1 fungus creatures equal to how many times you descended that turn. Now, you're descending a crap load in this deck. You're constantly putting, permanents and cards into your graveyard from everywhere, whether they're getting surveilled or they're going from the graveyard or whatever the case may be. Like, there's constantly stuff going into the graveyard. I had one turn where we got this from a 2/2 to a 17/17 in just one turn, and then it spits out 17 1/1s, right? And the reason this is even more synergistic and worth running, like, that's pretty good on its own, but you got to remember all the fungus tokens that it spits out, they're token creatures. So they synergize with the roots and can all tap for mana, which means you're playing everything. Like, any card you possibly have access to that you can spend mana on, you're doing it all. Which is why having man lands and lands in the land base that you can spend mana on is also important for this deck, but we'll get to that at the end. The other one drop is Tenacious Underdog, 2 mana 3/2. You can blitz it from your graveyard for 4 mana and paying 2 life. Enters with haste and dies at end of turn, has to get sacrificed at end of turn, and then draws you a card. Now, all of that is normally pretty good, like it can just keep coming back as a recursive threat, hit in for 3, draw you a card every single turn when you're out of gas. All that's good in any deck this goes in, but what makes this card especially good in this deck is blitzing it from the graveyard counts as something leaving your graveyard. So it's going to trigger your roots, it's going to trigger your Geist, and when all is said and done, it's going to draw you an extra card and then just go back in the graveyard so you can do it again the next turn. And that is huge. It might be worth having another copy in here, but for now we're sticking to one, because once you get your first one in the graveyard, you don't ever need another one. Like, you're using that same one over and over and over, and once you get to the point where you have enough mana where you could be blitzing 2 in the same turn, like, the game's probably over. But just that first one is hugely valuable, and if it just gets into the graveyard incidentally by surveilling or whatever, it can be a huge swing to just have access to one of these, especially if you're out of gas. It can start the chain up again, which is really important. So Underdog, amazing as a one of. The last one of is Shigeki, 𝐂𝐄𝐈 Visionary, 1 green and 1 for a 1/3 legendary enchantment creature snake druid. Pay 2 mana, tap him, return him to your hand, reveal the top 4, put a land from among them onto the battlefield tapped, put the rest into your graveyard. So even that first ability is going to fuel our synergies, help put stuff in the graveyard. And also we can like do things like chump block with him and then in response return him. So he's got a little bit of value there. But then when he comes back to our hand, what he's really good for is another way that later in the game, when we have all this mana that we're just flowing into, we're just drowning in mana from the roots, now we can channel Shigeki and put a ton of mana into the XX and return X non-legendary cards from our graveyard to our hand. That means we can grab our other copies of Insidious Roots that got surveilled away. We can grab our Willow Geists. We can grab our Skyfisher Spiders so that we can start using them as removal. We can grab our Mycotyrant. We can grab all of these important spells that help us exponentially go over the top, but we can also just maybe grab some incidental stuff like Deathbonnet Sprouts and Scrapgorgers and Seed of Hopes and all sorts of stuff. So as a thing that we can play at the top end to make use of all that mana, but that also isn't useless if our opponent deals with our roots. Maybe they destroy our roots along the way. Like, we can still make use of this. It's not wasted. There are a lot of other possible cards we could consider as top end to make use of all that mana, but I feel like all of them are win more because they only work if you have a ton of mana from the roots. And if your opponent deals with your roots, they're kind of do nothings. They just clog up your hand. So having a card like Shigeki, where it can give us a ton of value at the top end with all that mana from the roots, but then still function for us and still do stuff for us if we don't have our roots yet, or if our opponent dealt with it, makes Shigeki a really, really good inclusion. And he's another one that we're sticking to one of. But then looking at the mana base, we're only running 18 lands, because we just have so many ways to dig for lands, and we have mana production from the Scrapgorger. Like, it would be absolutely ridiculous to include more than 18, in my opinion. Like, all we need to do is get to 2, and then we're just going out of control with mana anyway. So we've got 2 forests, 1 Boseiju, 1 Takenuma, 1 swamp. It's worth noting the Takenuma can actually play into the synergies and get stuff we want and fill up the graveyard. And then we've got 4 Deathcap Glades, 4 Llanowar Wastes, 3 Restless Cottage, because it can turn into a creature that swings and then exiles something from a graveyard for 4 mana. It It also gives us a food token, which is just incidental value. We don't really need the food token, but it could make the difference here or there in like an aggro game or whatever. But really just being able to swing with a man land and exile a card as another way to exile a card each turn is really nice. And it's a good way to use that extra mana that we have floating around with all the Insidious Roots plants. Then we've also got one Underground Mortuary just to try it out. It's the new dual land. It's a swamp forest that enters tapped. And when it enters, you get to surveil one, which is actually pretty good in this deck. So I kind of like this dual land, and in future versions, I might actually add more of them. Being able to surveil when you play a land is nice. It coming into play tapped is a little iffy, but I think overall we don't have a lot of tap lands in this deck, so it should be fine. And then we've got one Mirex because we do have a lot of 1-drops. We have a lot of green and black mana commitment and not a lot of space open for colorless, so we don't want to go too crazy on the Mirexes, but we have to run at least one, right? It can make a token creature every single turn, which can then be tapped for mana with the Insidious Roots, so we absolutely need the Mirex for when we're running out of gas, but just one copy, I think, otherwise we're going to really screw up our mana when it comes to making sure we have the mana we need to cast all these 1-drops one after one after one. So this is the deck. It seems just incredibly insane, and you're going to see in the games just how far we can take it. And like I said, keep in mind the fact that we don't really need too much of a top end because our plants are getting so big so quick that a lot of times we can just win the game when we would have enough mana to cast some crazy big mana spell anyway. But if you've got ideas of cards you think would be great for this that you'd want to see in it, let me know in a comment down below. And without further ado, let's check out these games. All right, 2 roots in our opening hand. This looks great. We're going to keep it. Let's start with a Wastes and play a Maverick. Do we play the Scrapgorger out before the roots? I think so. I think we do. Swing. Play out the Scrapgorger. Because then we can play our roots before using the Scrapgorger and get some value. Green. I guess we go like this. And we go black. Exile our own Gorehound. Leave the Scrapgorger in there for Tyvar. Play another roots. No tax. We can chump block with the Maverick. That's kind of perfect. We want that anyway. You know what? Let's kill his token. Let's kill his token. I think we're about to go off. Alright, so we'll Tyvar. -2. Hit a Scrapgorger. Trigger both roots. Yeah, this is gonna be something. Seed of Hope. We'll exile the Gorehound. Trigger both roots. Grab a... Okay, our opponent's just gonna scoop. Game 3, or turn 3 win. This is absolutely keepable. We're gonna go turn 1 Gorehound. Turn 2 Scrapgorger. Surveil. Hit an Underdog. I'll take it. Swing 1. Resolute Reinforcements. Alright. Trade with that. We get a Gorehound in our graveyard, so it's not the worst. We kind of want that. Alright, so black. Play the roots. Play... Let me think. I guess we'll Mortuary first. Surveil one. Ooh, a roots. Gotta keep that on top. So then we'll play Ichor Drinker so that we can keep the roots, because Maverick would put the roots in our yard with the Surveil, or else we just waste the Surveil. So let's just do it this way. And then I think next turn we can just, like, go off. It's gonna have to get the Mycotyrant, right? Yeah. But that's fine. Alright, so, to start, we play the roots. We've still got 3 mana available. We've got nothing in the yard, though. That's the big problem. Swing with the Ichor Drinker. He can't really block. Okay, he doesn't realize it. We've got Ichor Drinker in there. Then we're gonna go green. Play the Maverick, Surveil 2. Plays a Resolute Reinforcements, that's fine. Maverick and Gorehound, perfect. We've got 2 mana left over. We play the Cottage. We're going to exile the Ichor Drinker. Trigger, trigger, trigger. Exile the Gorehound. Keep our other guys in the yard since they can be exiled with their own abilities. And then we've got 1 more mana. So I guess we go like this. And then we say go. That's just insane. I don't know if there's any way our opponent can come back from this. Oh my god. Turn 4 win. This deck's bananas. Let's see, we got 2 lands. We have a turn 1 play. We've got Insidious Roots. We're keeping. Play out Boseiju. Play the Willow Geist. We need 1 more land for turn 3 Tyvar. Or something that can exile. Just need something that can exile next turn. So if we top deck anything at all that can help us do that. Another Tyvar. That's kind of rough. Let's swing 1. We'll play the other roots out. We still might be okay. We top deck a land and slam Tyvar, like, that's probably game. Gonna play Adeline. Gonna swing at me for 2. No land, unfortunately. Surveil 2. Ichor Drinkers in the yard. That saved us. That saved us. Exile the Ichor Drinker. Trigger the Roots. Trigger the Geist. No attacks. Next turn we should be able to just go off. Adversary. That's fine. We'll just block here. And we'll take 9. Because we are about to go completely ham. So first things first. We're going to turn the incubator token into a creature because we can use it for mana then. Then we're going to play Tyvar. Then we're going to -2.
This will be quick. Your story's not finished.
Then we're going to get Willow Geist into play. Trigger everything. Oh god. Ichor Drinker. Yeah, we're going off. We are going off. We're gonna play Skyfisher Spider. Sacrifice the Maverick. Hit the Adeline. No attacks. He's got 1 turn. Next turn we completely roll over him. Doesn't even matter what you hit. Doesn't even matter. You can't even swing. If our Skyfisher Spider dies, we get to exile it and do crazy things. I mean, we don't need to be greedy, right? Gain a whole bunch of life. Exile the thing. Trigger the roots. And good game. Go like this. Holy moly. This looks fine. We'll keep it. Try to use Seed of Hope to find our Insidious Roots. If not, maybe a land. Oh. Actually, we've got our Insidious Roots. We'll just play it. And then we're probably going to go Willow Geist, Seed of Hope. Charming Scoundrel. Alright, Willow Geist. Seed of Hope. Grab the Scrapgorger. Get some triggers. Pass the turn. And then I think next turn we just kind of go off. 3 mana. Tyvar. Rubblebelt Maverick. Deathbonnet Sprout. Or maybe Ichor Drinker. I mean, we'll just block. You know what? Let's block here. That's fine. That is fine. Alright, so. Tyvar. -2.
It's not a victory.
Get back a Gorehound. Make a plant, surveil. Then we'll go Rubblebelt Maverick. Put the counter on the Menace guy. Make another plant. Put another Maverick in the yard. Do it again. Put a Skyfisher Spider in the yard. And now we're out of gas. We'll play a Deathbonnet Sprout. Put a Willow Geist in the yard. No attacks. We'll just shore up our defenses this turn, and then next turn we'll Alpha Strike. Craziest turn 3 ever. Missed the land drop and it didn't matter. Swinging just that guy at that, huh? Well, we'll go like that. If he's got a lightning strike, you know what? Screw that. We're gonna go like this. And then we'll do this. So no matter what, we keep our Willow Geist. If he's thinking about giving that thing trample and killing the Tyvar, that is not happening. You could lightning strike the Tyvar if you'd like. Interesting. Does he have a second one? He's gonna lightning strike it as well? Okay. You realize we're just gonna gain 5 life. 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 damage we can do. We just need 4 more. Let's see. 1 land. We do have a Scrapgorger. I don't think it's going to cut it. We're going to mulligan. This is much better. We're going to keep 6. We're going to toss back a Scrapgorger. And we're going to start with the cottage. Alright, I think we want the Gorehound and the Maverick first rather than the Scrapgorger. No, we'll get the Scrapgorger first. I think it's greedy to try and get the Surveil off the Scrapgorger later. I think we need the mana now. So we're going to start with Gorehound. Then we'll play a Maverick. Do a whole bunch of surveilling. You and you in the yard. Well, yeah. There's our roots. We'll keep that on top. And we'll play another Rubblebelt Maverick. We'll just get rid of the wastes here. We are not going to surveil. Holy crap, 2 roots. Yes, we're gonna keep those both on top. I know we need mana, but it's okay. Will he kill the Scrapgorger? That's really the question. Losing the Gorehound would be a bummer, but Scrapgorger's really important. It's the only thing right now that can exile something without taking up mana, and it also gives us mana, right? I guess we wait. Probably should have just exiled that organically first. Just go to combat. Go for the throats, the Scrapgorger. Let's just swing with the Gorehound, get in for 1. We'll use the Rubblebelt Maverick as a chump blocker. We don't want to be too willy-nilly with that and just run it into his guy because we're greedy and want it in the yard. It's going to get more value for us over time, so. Alright, we still tap the plant for mana, so we're still at 3 as far as mana production. So with a little bit of luck, I think we can pull this off. We're going to play Tyvar. Do a little bit of melee. We will grab Scrapgorger. That gives us the 2 mana we need for Roots. And then we exile the Gorehound to get more mana. And then now we'll swing with 1 Rubblebelt Maverick, because if he blocks it, we just keep going. Alright. Apparently he decided to do the damn thing. We're going to get 2 triggers off our Roots now. And then we're going to play Shigeki. Because why not? Just play everything out. Who even needs lands? Who even needs lands? Not I. Come on into my Rubblebelt Maverick. Sick. Thank you. Alright, so we'll play a Scrapgorger. We do need creatures in the yard. That's the one thing I'm kind of worried about. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go tap this for green, exile the Sprout, trigger the Roots, then I'm going to tap this for green, use the Shigeki, put some more stuff in the yard. Then we'll go green, exile the Gorehound, go even crazier. Then we'll grab Rubblebelt Maverick, put a counter on, I guess, you. Go even crazier. And our opponent's gonna scoop. Looks good to me. Alright, this looks fine. We're gonna try and keep it. Start with the Glade. Turn 2, we're gonna go Ichor Drinker, Rubblebelt Maverick. I lied. We're gonna go Deathbonnet Sprout. And the Maverick to surveil. Start setting ourselves up. That's not good. No creatures. That's rough. Oh, right. Deathbonnet Sprout mills. I'm a moron. We're going to play the Ichor Drinker. Trigger the Gorehound. Put another Ichor Drinker in the yard. Swing 2. Cut down. Go for the throat. Don't think he wants to really use his removal on any of our stuff. It's just not good. Liana, I mean, that's good for us.
A fight? And you think you can
It's gonna make us discard. That's fine. We'll discard the Mycotyrant. Alright, we've got our land. We're gonna go Roots. Incubate. Trigger the Roots. Put a Scrapgorger in the yard. And then we'll swing everybody at Liliana. Make sure she doesn't make us discard our Tyvar. Because we're going to go off next turn with Tyvar. Hopefully. We shall see. Tyvar's pretty nuts. Tyvar might actually be good enough to go up to 4 of. It's just kind of that good. We're going to do this. We're going to do this. We're going to grab you. Trigger the Gorehound and the Roots. Gorehound in the yard. Gorehound again. Maverick in the yard. We'll go... How likely is it that I get to that? You know what? Let's start with this. We will exile a Gorehound. Trigger the Roots. Put you in the yard. Tyvar. Yeah, we gotta keep going. We gotta keep going, right? Put a +1/+1 counter, I guess, on the Gorehound. Ichor Drinker in the yard. Forest in the yard. Next to combat, we'll swing with you, you, and you. Blocks the Rubblebelt Maverick, which means we can keep going. Scrapgorger in the yard. And we'll stop there. End the turn. We can use our plants to turn these incubate tokens into actual creatures if we want. I think what he's doing is just going to be too slow. Ichor Drinker in the yard. And then we can immediately use that token for mana, so we can make the other token good. Draw. I think we're off to the races. Yeah, he's scooping. We're coming in for so much. This looks fine. We'll keep it. We've got our mana, we've got our roots, we've got a turn 1 play. We've got some Scrapgorgers so we can start enabling the roots. Sure. Play the land. We're going to start with a Scrapgorger. And we're going to swing with the Sprout because we can. Phoenix Chick. Sure. Don't think it's going to be enough, friend. Play with fire the Sprout. That's fine. Let's see. I guess we go Roots, Scrapgorger, exile the Sprout that he just killed, get a plant, pass the turn. Next turn is going to be absolutely bananas. Just absolutely bananas. Come at me, Mono Red. That's fine. We'll take 6. Go to 11. Do a little bit of that. And then we'll do a little bit of this. And then we'll do a little bit of this.
Carve our deeds into history. Share in my glory.
Grab a Gorehound. Trigger. Tyvar in the yard. Trigger. Geisty. Another Tyvar. We'll go green. Exile our Geisty. Make another plant. Trigger the Gorehounds. Geisty in the yard. Deathcap Glade in the yard. Then we'll go black. Exile our Geisty. Get some more triggers. Underdog in the yard. Rubblebelt Maverick in the yard. Then we'll go Rubblebelt Maverick. Put a counter on this dude. Trigger. Maverick in the yard. It just keeps going. Spider in the yard. We'll go another Rubblebelt Maverick. Trigger. Can't even see anything anymore. Another Rubblebelt Maverick. Skyfisher Spider. We'll do another one. Put it here. Trigger. Seed of Hope in the yard. Scrapgorger in the yard. Then we'll go like this. Blitz an Underdog. Get some more triggers. Swing for 14. Holy moly. I'm gonna need to move my camera so that you guys can see this board. Can he do it? I don't think he's got enough. Don't think he's got enough. I think we got him. Block here. Block here. Take 7, go to 2. And our opponent scoops. Thanks so much for checking out my channel. I'd like to give a huge shout out to all of my patrons over at Patreon. Without you guys, this channel would not be possible, so honestly, thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of your contributions. If you haven't yet, like and subscribe. The more likes we get and the quicker we get them, the bigger this channel will grow and the faster it will grow. I'd love nothing more than this channel to become something very special for you guys, but it's entirely up to you how fast that happens. Also, if you'd like more deck text, that's somewhere over there. And if you'd like to see what else the channel's been up to lately, that's somewhere up that way. Also, subscribe, circle below, do all the things.